Well, Super Tuesday election results are in. Joe Biden coming from behind and scoring big wins. Joining us from Washington, D.C. to discuss is Michael Isikoff. He's Yahoo News chief investigative correspondent. Michael, Biden did very well. There's no question. But Sanders is still in there, right? I mean, he won California, which is no small thing. Where do you see it going forward? And how is the narrative changing here? And also, as always, is there danger of sort of the narrative dictating what ends up happening going forward?
If we've learned anything, it's that the narrative of the pundits this campaign season has very little to do with what actually happens when voters go into the voting booth. I mean, the big losers in all this are the pundits and the model forecasters and all the people who have been telling us what we can expect to happen. And as we see what they say, it's often exactly the reverse. Look, Sanders is still in there. I don't want to take away from the victory in California, but by and large, he got shellacked yesterday. I mean, the Biden performance was way ahead of expectations, and the fact that Biden carried Massachusetts, Texas, and Minnesota, those are huge victories that do not bode well for Bernie Sanders. Looking forward, look at next week. We got Mississippi, Missouri, and Michigan are the big ones. Mississippi and Missouri look like a lock for Biden at this point. Michigan is the wild card. Sanders carried that strength of Biden.
Michael, I think we got you back. Okay. Hey, real quick, Michael, when you talk about Michigan, can you read anything? Because I realize they're separated by hundreds of miles. Virginia, and the fact that the number of people who voted in Virginia was twice as high this time as it was in the last primary.
Right. Look, those margins, the turnout and the margins for Biden in these states is really striking. And just to complete the point I was going to make, now with Bloomberg out, and we should say something about, I was talking before about the screaming irrelevancy of the pundits. How about the screaming irrelevancy of big money in politics? Nobody's, what did Bloomberg spend? More than $500 million, and he gets a few delegates out of the American Samoa. That should tell us something about the limitations of spending huge amounts of money in these races. But getting back to Michigan, look, if Biden, with Bloomberg's collapse and him out of the race, if Biden actually takes Michigan, this race could be over as early as next week. And if not next week, go on to the next week. Illinois and Florida. Florida looks like a lock for Biden, too. So I see Biden as now the clear favorite. And this race, if it's not over next week, could be over by the end of the month.
Hey, Michael, it's David Nelson here in New York. If this is as you say, and Biden looks like a lock for this, and he goes on, is there a way that the Sanders campaign can work with Biden? Very often at the end of these things, the two frontrunners actually come together and maybe even have a joint ticket. Is there any way that Bernie Sanders could work with Joe Biden, maybe be the VP, and would Joe Biden accept it?
First of all, Bernie Sanders is not going to be the vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden. No way, no how. Biden is a 77-year-old white guy, and picking a 78-year-old white guy as your running mate is not likely in any scenario. And listen to what Bernie Sanders was saying last night. He was going after Joe Biden, making the contrast between him and Joe Biden. He voted against the Iraq war. Joe Biden voted for the Iraq war. He opposed the credit card companies. Joe Biden was the shill for the credit card companies. So Bernie was showing no signs of conciliation last night. That's not his nature. I suspect he's going to, keep fighting for his what he sees as his principles. But I don't see a clear path for him to overtake Biden at this point.
Michael, it's Julia LaRoche. What about Senator Elizabeth Warren? What do you think is the conversation going on in that campaign? It certainly doesn't seem like there's a path there because, as we're talking about here, it's Biden versus Sanders at this point.
No, there's zero path for Elizabeth Warren. So that is a legitimate wild card, because were Warren to drop out, and if she were to endorse Bernie Sanders, that would be the one play that could keep Sanders going. But I'm not so sure Warren is willing to do that. Certainly, she has no path to continue her candidacy. But whether remember, it wasn't too long ago, a few weeks ago, that Elizabeth Warren was accusing Bernie Sanders of lying about her on national television. So I don't think she has a lot of warm feelings towards Bernie Sanders, even though they share that same ideological space on the progressive end of the spectrum. And also she has pretty sharply attacked Biden, particularly on the bankruptcy fight, which was her sort of big moment. So I think Warren gets out. She's worked
with Biden, and Sanders is not a Democrat. I mean, the question I'm asking is, who does Warren gain more from by cooperating? Biden or Bernie? It would seem to me Biden. Because she could get more of her agenda through.
That's true, but also I think it would be seen by many of her supporters as a betrayal of her progressive principles were she to endorse Biden, at least endorse Biden very soon after dropping out. I expect she'll drop out, but I don't think she'll endorse right away. At the end of the day, when we get closer to the convention, she will, of course, endorse the nominee. But I don't see her doing that right away. I think she gets out and stays silent for a while.
Michael Isikoff, Yahoo News chief investigative correspondent. Good to talk to you as always.
Anytime.